On September the 3rd, units of the British 8th Army crossed the Straits of Messina and began advancing along the toe of Italy. 6 days later, in response to urgent Italian requests for assistance, an Allied invasion force landed in the Gulf of Salerno. The attack precipitated a German seizure of power, and German units already in Italy were sent to Salerno to counter-attack the beachhead. Salerno was to be the first real test for the Allies. The invasion fleet was exposed to air attacks from Luftwaffe bases on the Italian mainland. The beachhead area was flanked by high ground, providing excellent positions for German artillery. And the corridor of the Seely River allowed the Germans to mount concentrated armoured thrusts against a broad sector of the beachhead. For a week, the Allies clung tenaciously to their lodgment. German counterattacks were broken up by naval gunfire, directed either visually or by shore-based observers. Despite harassment from the air and the loss of 2 cruisers, the warships stood firm, eventually forcing a German withdrawal. While the battle for Salerno was at its height, the 8th Army was pressing slowly northwards. On September the 20th, contact with the 5th Army was established west of Salerno, but by then, the German withdrawal was already well underway. The Italian campaign was to last until the end of the war. From Salerno, the Germans conducted a fighting retreat northwards before settling for the winter behind the formidable defences of the Gustav Line. By the end of the year, the Mediterranean had been largely relegated to a secondary theatre of operations. Although Rome still remained in German hands, the central objectives of the campaign had been achieved. Italy had ceased to play an active part in the war, and up to 80 Italian divisions had either been disarmed or interned by the Germans. To hold what remained of the country, Hitler would have to commit forces that might be better employed in the east or in the defense of France. Despite his reputation as Britain's outstanding wartime leader, Churchill was no great strategist, tending to confuse purely military objectives with political goals. Indeed, it was in the world of politics and diplomacy that Churchill both excelled and served his country best. Recognizing that the defeat of Germany could only be guaranteed with the active military support of America, he took every opportunity to press Britain's case. In 1941, he obtained vital agreements on preferential military aid, recognition of mutual interests and aspirations, and in the event of America being drawn into the conflict, a firm commitment to a common set of war aims. Churchill was the driving force behind the campaign in the Mediterranean, but like all of his ventures, it was founded more on political considerations than on military logic. Italy he regarded as the key to the region, to control of Greece and the Balkans, and to the security of Britain's interests in the Middle East. Churchill's commitment to Operation Overlord was always conditioned by wider strategic considerations. From 1942, he believed that the defeat of Germany was assured, and that the fragile alliance with Russia would prove short-lived. The future containment of Soviet expansion would, in his view, be best achieved by a concentration of effort in the Mediterranean, even at the expense of postponing Overlord until 1945. By 1940, Roosevelt had become convinced that America's long-term interests were directly threatened by Axis ambitions. Although neutrality still remained the guiding principle of American foreign policy, Roosevelt from this time onwards exerted every influence to lend assistance to Britain and to prepare America for a conflict that he believed was inevitable. In July, within weeks of the capitulation of France, he signed the Two-Ocean Navy Act, initiating a major expansion of American naval power. In September, he introduced conscription with the Selective Service Act, and in March of the following year, he inaugurated Lend-Lease, an arrangement by which Britain and later Russia would receive military aid denied to the Axis. As a full partner in the alliance, Roosevelt remained true to the commitments he had given Churchill, concentrating the main weight of American arms against the European Axis powers. For Roosevelt, the defeat of Germany as the senior Axis partner was an overriding priority, and his preferred strategy was for an early invasion of France. In 1942, he was dissuaded from this by Churchill, and in 1943, by America's growing involvement in the war against Italy. Nevertheless, he remained a firm advocate of a cross-channel attack and regarded the Mediterranean as a diversion. After Stalingrad, Hitler knew he faced the prospect of a long and exhausting war in the East. He had suffered defeats in the past, but the setbacks of 1943 had gravely weakened his armies, undermined morale, and placed additional burdens on the already stretched resources of the Reich. Yet he still believed himself marked by Providence. Victory was not yet beyond his grasp. In the East, he determined to hold fast, fighting for every town and village, while preparing for what he believed would be the decisive battle in the West. If he could win a crushing victory there, he could restore morale both at home and in the army, and with the forces released, settle his final accounts with the Russians. Hitler was under no illusion as to where the battle would take place. In 1942, he had known that the Allies were not yet strong enough to mount a serious attack on the French coast. In 1943, he had judged that the campaign in the Mediterranean would take up most of the available Allied resources. But he was also aware that Italy offered only a long and tortuous road to the Reich, and that the Mediterranean was no more than a diversion. The main Allied campaign of the war, he knew, was yet to begin, and it would take place not in Italy, but in France. Outline plans for a cross-channel attack had been drawn up as early as December 1941, and within weeks, regular American forces had been embarked for England. There they would be joined by advance units of the newly designated American 8th Air Force, a mixed command of fighters and bombers charged